Sarah Martinez had always been invisible to most people. At 23, she worked the night shift at Mercy General Hospital as a cleaning lady, moving through the halls like a shadow. Nobody really noticed her except when trash cans needed emptying or floors required mopping. She was just another face in the background of a busy city hospital. The 5 doctors who ran the emergency department barely acknowledged her existence. Dr. Richard Kane, the chief of emergency medicine, would walk past her as if she was furniture. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the ambitious surgeon, treated her like she was beneath notice. Dr. Marcus Thompson, the cardiologist, acted like she didn't exist. Dr. Lisa Chen, the neurologist, never even made eye contact. And Dr. David Rodriguez, the trauma specialist, would order her around like she was a machine. These doctors lived in a different world from Sarah. They drove expensive cars, lived in big houses, and made more money in a month than Sarah made in 2 years. They saw themselves as important people saving lives, while Sarah was just someone who cleaned up their messes. But Sarah saw everything. She heard everything. While she worked quietly in the corners and emptied trash bins, she watched these doctors make decisions that sometimes had nothing to do with helping patients. She heard them talk about money, about cutting corners, about hiding mistakes. She saw them laugh about poor patients who couldn't pay their bills. One cold October night, Sarah discovered something that would change everything. She was cleaning Dr. Kane's office when she found a folder hidden behind his desk. Inside were documents that made her hands shake as she read them. The doctors had been running an illegal organ trafficking ring for over 2 years. They were taking organs from patients who died in the emergency room and selling them on the black market. Worse, some patients weren't actually dead when they took their organs. They were choosing poor patients, homeless people, and others nobody would miss. They would let these people die on purpose, then harvest their organs for huge profits. Sarah felt sick as she read the details. Dozens of people had died because these doctors chose money over their lives. The documents showed bank accounts with millions of dollars, fake death certificates, and lists of buyers willing to pay enormous amounts for fresh organs. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. These people who were supposed to save lives were actually killing for money. The folder contained photos, financial records, and even schedules for upcoming procedures. They had turned the hospital into their personal money-making operation. Sarah knew she had to do something. She couldn't let these doctors continue killing innocent people. She carefully took photos of all the documents with her phone, making sure to capture every detail. Her hands were trembling as she worked, terrified that someone might walk in and catch her. The next morning, Sarah went to the police station. She sat nervously in the waiting room for over an hour before a tired-looking detective agreed to see her. Detective Mike Harrison looked like he hadn't slept in days. When Sarah tried to explain what she had found, he barely listened. "You're telling me that 5 respected doctors are running some kind of organ-stealing operation?" Detective Harrison asked, with obvious doubt in his voice. "Do you know how crazy that sounds?" Sarah showed him the photos on her phone, but the detective just glanced at them quickly. "These could be fake. Do you know how easy it is to make fake documents these days? Besides, these doctors have perfect reputations. Dr. Kane has been saving lives for 15 years. The detective explained that Sarah would need much stronger evidence before anyone would take her seriously. "You're a cleaning lady accusing some of the most respected doctors in the city," he said coldly. "If you're wrong, you could face serious charges for false accusations. These doctors could sue you for everything you have." Sarah left the police station feeling defeated and frustrated. Nobody would believe her because she was just a poor cleaning woman going against powerful doctors. She realized that her word meant nothing compared to theirs. The system was designed to protect people like them, not people like her. But Sarah refused to give up. She started collecting more evidence. Every night at work, she carefully documented everything she could find. She took more photos, made copies of files, and even recorded conversations when the doctors thought nobody was listening. She discovered that the operation was bigger than she had thought. The doctors had connections with organ buyers all over the world. They had corrupted other hospital staff members, including some nurses and security guards. The money trail showed payments to morgue workers, ambulance drivers, and even some police officers. The more Sarah learned, the more dangerous her situation became. She noticed that some of the doctors were starting to look at her suspiciously. Dr. Kane asked her unusual questions about her work schedule. Dr. Walsh seemed to be watching her when she cleaned their offices. Dr. Thompson made comments about how cleaning staff should mind their own business. Sarah began to fear for her safety. She made copies of all her evidence and hid them in different places. She wrote detailed letters explaining everything she had discovered and left them with trusted friends. She changed her daily routines and started being very careful about where she went and who she talked to. One night in early November, Sarah was working her usual shift when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. The 5 doctors were meeting in Dr. Kane's office, and they were talking about her. "The cleaning woman knows something," Dr. Chen was saying. "I've seen her taking pictures in the hallways. She's been asking too many questions." "We can't take any chances," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "If she talks to the right people, everything we've built could be destroyed. We have too much money invested in this operation to let some nobody ruin it." Dr. Kane's voice was calm but threatening. "Sarah Martinez works alone at night. Accidents happen in hospitals all the time. People slip and fall, equipment malfunctions. Who would question the death of a cleaning lady?" Sarah's heart was pounding as she listened. They were planning to kill her. These doctors who had sworn to save lives were casually discussing murder like it was a simple business decision. She realized that she had to get out of the hospital immediately. She quietly finished her work and left the building as normally as possible. But she could feel eyes watching her as she walked to the parking garage. Her old car seemed to take forever to start, and every shadow looked like it might be hiding someone dangerous. Over the next few days, Sarah tried everything she could think of to expose the truth. She contacted newspaper reporters, but they wanted confirmation from official sources before they would print anything. She reached out to federal authorities, but they said local police had to investigate first. She even tried calling medical licensing boards, but they said they needed formal complaints with substantial proof. Everywhere Sarah turned, she faced the same problem. Nobody would take her word over that of 5 respected doctors. The evidence she had collected was dismissed as possibly fake or misunderstood. People looked at her like she was crazy or trying to get attention by making wild accusations. Meanwhile, the pressure on Sarah was increasing. She received threatening phone calls at home. Someone broke into her apartment and searched through her things. Her car tires were slashed twice in 1 week. Strange people began following her around town, making sure she knew she was being watched. The doctors were sending her a clear message: stop investigating or face the consequences. But Sarah had seen too much to give up now. She knew that innocent people were dying because of these doctors' greed, and she was the only one who could stop them. On a rainy night in late November, Sarah made a decision that would seal her fate. She was going to break into the hospital's computer system and download all the digital records that proved the doctors' crimes. She had learned that they kept detailed electronic files about their organ trafficking operations, including buyer contacts and financial records. Sarah waited until the hospital was at its quietest, around 3 in the morning. She used her cleaning access to get into the administrative offices where the main computer servers were located. Her plan was simple: copy everything onto flash drives and then release it all to the media at the same time. But the doctors had been expecting something like this. As Sarah sat at the computer terminal downloading files, she heard footsteps in the hallway. The 5 doctors entered the room together, led by Dr. Kane. Their faces showed no emotion as they surrounded her. Did you really think we wouldn't be watching you? Dr. Kane asked quietly. Did you think you were smart enough to outsmart us? We've been planning this for a long time, Sarah. We know how to handle problems. Dr. Walsh stepped forward with a syringe in her hand. This will be quick and painless. Just a heart attack from too much stress. Nobody will question it. Poor cleaning lady working too hard probably had a weak heart. Sarah tried to run, but Dr. Thompson and Dr. Rodriguez grabbed her arms. She screamed for help, but the administrative section of the hospital was empty at this hour. Dr. Chen held her head steady while Dr. Walsh prepared to inject the deadly drug. Please, Sarah begged. You're doctors. You're supposed to help people. How can you do this? We help people who matter, Dr. Kane replied coldly. You're nobody. Your death won't change anything. Tomorrow, we'll continue our work, and the world will keep turning. Nobody will even remember your name. The injection burned as it entered Sarah's bloodstream. She felt her heart beginning to race irregularly as the poison spread through her body. The doctors watched clinically as she collapsed to the floor, her vision blurring and her breathing becoming shallow. Make it look like she was working when it happened, Dr. Kane instructed the others. Put her cleaning supplies nearby. Delete any files she might have accessed tonight. Check her pockets for flash drives or memory cards. As Sarah lay dying on the cold hospital floor, she could hear the doctors calmly discussing how to cover up her murder. They talked about falsifying medical records, bribing the coroner, and ensuring that nobody would investigate too closely. To them, she was just another problem they had solved. Sarah's last thoughts were not of fear or anger, but of all the innocent people these doctors would continue to kill. She thought about the families who would never know what really happened to their loved ones. She thought about future victims who would die because nobody had been able to stop these monsters. The next morning, Sarah's body was discovered by the day shift supervisor. The official cause of death was listed as sudden cardiac arrest, brought on by stress and overwork. The 5 doctors performed their usual duties, expressing appropriate sadness about the loss of a hard-working employee. A small funeral was held 3 days later. Sarah's few friends and family members gathered to say goodbye to someone they described as kind, honest, and caring. The doctors attended the service, playing their parts as concerned colleagues who would miss their dedicated cleaning staff member. But death was not the end of Sarah's story. It was only the beginning of something much more terrifying than anything the 5 doctors could have imagined. They had assumed that killing her would solve their problem and let them continue their profitable operation in peace. They had no idea what they had actually unleashed. Sarah Martinez had died believing that justice would never come. But sometimes, justice finds a way to reach beyond the grave. Sometimes, the innocent dead refuse to rest until the truth is revealed and the guilty pay for their crimes. Sometimes, being underestimated in life becomes the greatest advantage in death. 3 weeks after Sarah Martinez's funeral, strange things began happening at Mercy General Hospital. At first, the incidents were small enough that people dismissed them as coincidences or equipment malfunctions. But as the days passed, it became impossible to ignore that something unusual was occurring in the hospital, especially around the 5 doctors who had killed her. The first sign came during Dr. Richard Kane's night shift in the emergency department. He was reviewing patient charts when all the lights in his office suddenly went out. The backup generator didn't kick in, which was unusual, but maintenance said they found nothing wrong with the electrical system. When the lights came back on a few minutes later, Kane found that his computer screen was displaying Sarah's employee photograph instead of the medical files he had been reading. Kane felt a chill run down his spine, but he told himself it was just a computer glitch. He quickly closed the image and went back to work, trying to push the incident out of his mind. But throughout the rest of his shift, he kept feeling like someone was watching him. Every time he turned around expecting to see a nurse or another doctor, The hallway was empty. Dr. Jennifer Walsh experienced something similar 2 days later. She was performing surgery when the operating room sound system began playing a recording of Sarah's voice. It was audio from security cameras that had captured Sarah talking to herself while she worked, saying things like, "I have to stop them," and "innocent people are dying." The surgical team looked around in confusion as Sarah's voice echoed through the operating room. Walsh demanded that someone turn off the audio, but the technicians couldn't figure out how to stop it. The recording played for nearly 10 minutes before suddenly cutting off on its own. When maintenance checked the system later, they found no explanation for how Sarah's voice had gotten into the surgical audio feed. The security recordings with her voice had supposedly been deleted weeks ago. Dr. Marcus Thompson was the next to be targeted. While working late in his office, he started hearing footsteps in the hallway outside. The footsteps had a specific pattern, the soft sound of rubber-soled shoes that cleaning staff wore. Thompson opened his door to check, but the hallway was completely empty. However, he could smell the faint scent of industrial cleaning supplies that Sarah used to use. The footsteps continued every night when Thompson worked late. They would start around midnight and continue until dawn, always following the same path that Sarah used to take during her cleaning rounds. Sometimes Thompson would follow the sounds, but he never found anyone. Security cameras showed him walking alone through the corridors, apparently chasing nothing. Dr. Lisa Chen began experiencing problems with her medical equipment. Machines would turn on and off by themselves when she was treating patients. Computer screens would flicker and display Sarah's face for just a moment before returning to normal. During one particularly frightening incident, an MRI machine started up while Chen was standing near it, even though it wasn't scheduled to be used and no one was operating it. The most disturbing part was that these malfunctions only happened when Chen was around. Other doctors could use the same equipment without any problems. The hospital's technical staff checked everything multiple times, but could never find any mechanical or electrical faults that would explain the strange behavior. Dr. David Rodriguez found that his medical files kept disappearing and reappearing in different locations. Important patient records would vanish from his office overnight, only to be found the next morning in places where Sarah used to work, the supply closets, the janitor's break room, or tucked behind cleaning equipment. Sometimes the files would be arranged to spell out words like justice or truth. Rodriguez became increasingly paranoid about his paperwork. He started locking everything in a safe, but even that didn't help. Files would somehow escape from the locked safe and be found scattered around areas of the hospital that Sarah had been responsible for cleaning. Security footage never showed anyone moving the documents. As the weeks passed, the supernatural activities escalated dramatically. The 5 doctors found that they couldn't escape the haunting even when they left the hospital. Sarah's ghost began following them to their homes, their cars, and everywhere they went. Dr. Kane started seeing Sarah's reflection in mirrors and windows instead of his own. When he looked in his bathroom mirror in the morning, Sarah's face would stare back at him with accusing eyes. When he drove to work, her reflection would appear in his rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat of his car. Kane stopped looking at reflective surfaces altogether, but he could still feel her presence watching him constantly. Dr. Walsh began receiving phone calls in the middle of the night. When she answered, she would hear Sarah's voice reading aloud the names of all the people the doctors had killed for their organs. The calls always came from the hospital's main number, but when Walsh checked with the phone company, they said no calls had been made from that number during those times. The voice would list names, ages, and details about each victim before the line went dead. Dr. Thompson discovered that Sarah had somehow gained access to his personal computer and banking records. His home computer would turn on by itself and display information about the illegal organ sales. Bank statements showing the profits from their crimes would print out automatically in the middle of the night. Thompson changed his passwords and even bought a new computer, but Sarah continued to access his digital life somehow. Dr. Chen found that her medical degrees and certificates were being rearranged on her office wall to spell out accusations like murderer and guilty. She would arrive at work to find her diplomas had been moved overnight, despite the fact that her office was locked and no one else had access. Security guards confirmed that no one had entered her office, but the diplomas continued to move on their own. Dr. Rodriguez experienced the most frightening manifestations. Sarah's ghost would appear to him directly, usually when he was alone. She would stand at the foot of his bed at night, point at him accusingly, and mouth the word justice. During the day, she would appear in hospital hallways, always just at the edge of his vision. When he turned to look directly at her, she would be gone, but he could feel her hatred like a cold wind. The 5 doctors tried to rationalize what was happening to them. They told themselves they were experiencing guilt-induced hallucinations or stress-related psychological problems. They individually consulted psychiatrists and therapists, but none of them admitted to the murders they had committed. The mental health professionals could only treat them for general anxiety and recommend stress reduction techniques. But the supernatural attacks continued to intensify. Sarah's ghost seemed to be learning and becoming stronger. She began to interfere with their medical work directly, causing them to make dangerous mistakes that put patients at risk. During one of Dr. Kane's surgeries, his instruments would move on their own or disappear from the operating table. Surgical lights would flicker or go out at critical moments. Kane's hands would shake uncontrollably, as if invisible forces were interfering with his motor control. He began making errors that nearly killed patients, something that had never happened in his 15-year career. Dr. Walsh found that her surgical skills were being mysteriously impaired. Her normally steady hands would tremble during delicate procedures. She would lose her concentration at crucial moments, as if her mind was being clouded by outside influences. Colleagues began to question her competence, and she was forced to reduce her surgical schedule. The haunting expanded beyond just the 5 guilty doctors. Other hospital staff members began to notice strange phenomena throughout the building. Elevators would stop at floors where Sarah used to work, even when no one had pressed those buttons. Cleaning carts would roll through hallways by themselves, following the exact routes that Sarah had taken during her shifts. Security guards reported seeing a woman in cleaning uniform walking the halls at night, but when they tried to approach her, she would disappear. The figure always appeared on security cameras as just a shadowy blur, but guards who saw her in person described someone who looked exactly like Sarah Martinez. The hospital's administrative staff discovered that their computer systems contained files that shouldn't exist. Digital records showed detailed information about the organ trafficking operation, complete with financial records and victim lists. IT specialists couldn't explain how these files had gotten into the system or why they couldn't be deleted permanently. Every time they removed the files, they would reappear the next day. Nurses and other medical staff began talking about the cleaning lady ghost, who was trying to expose the truth about something terrible that had happened at the hospital. They didn't know the specific details, but they sensed that Sarah's spirit was seeking justice for some great wrong that had been committed. The 5 doctors realized they had to do something to stop the supernatural harassment. They met secretly to discuss their options, but even their private meetings were interrupted by Sarah's ghost. Lights would flicker, temperatures would drop suddenly, and they would hear Sarah's voice whispering accusations and threats. Dr. Kane suggested they try to perform some kind of exorcism or spiritual cleansing of the hospital. Dr. Walsh thought they should consult with paranormal investigators or priests. Dr. Thompson wanted to hire someone to perform protective rituals or create spiritual barriers. Dr. Chen believed they should try to communicate with Sarah's spirit and find out what she wanted. Dr. Rodriguez just wanted to leave town and start over somewhere else. But none of their proposed solutions addressed the real problem. They were being haunted because they were guilty of terrible crimes, and Sarah's spirit would not rest until justice was served. They could run from the hospital, but they couldn't run from their guilt or from the supernatural forces that had been awakened by their evil actions. As the haunting continued, the doctors began to turn on each other. The stress and fear were breaking down their partnership and making them suspicious of one another. Each doctor wondered if one of the others might confess to save themselves, potentially exposing the entire group. Dr. Rodriguez accused Dr. Kane of not properly disposing of evidence from Sarah's murder. Dr. Walsh suspected that Dr. Chen might have left clues that could lead investigators to the truth. Dr. Thompson worried that one of them might break under the supernatural pressure and admit everything to authorities. The paranoia and mutual distrust were exactly what Sarah's ghost wanted. She was systematically destroying their lives and their relationships, making them suffer for the pain they had caused her and their many victims. But this was only the beginning of her plan for revenge. Sarah had died believing that justice would never be served because she was powerless against wealthy, influential doctors. But death had given her powers she never had in life. She could access their secrets, interfere with their work, and torment them in ways they couldn't fight or understand. The 5 doctors who had killed her were about to learn that some debts can never be paid in full, and some crimes echo beyond the grave. Sarah Martinez had been invisible to them when she was alive, but in death, she had become impossible to ignore. 2 months after the haunting began, Sarah's ghost was ready to move beyond simple terror tactics. She had spent weeks learning how to manipulate the physical world, and had discovered that her supernatural abilities were growing stronger with time and determination. Now she was prepared to ensure that the 5 doctors would face real consequences for their crimes. The first phase of Sarah's final plan involved exposing the truth to the right people. While she couldn't directly communicate with the living in clear words, she had learned to manipulate technology and physical objects in ways that would force the evidence into the right hands. Sarah started by targeting Detective Mike Harrison, the same officer who had dismissed her when she was alive. She accessed his home computer and filled it with detailed information about the organ trafficking operation. Bank records, victim lists, medical files, and photographs of the crimes appeared on his screen every time he turned on his computer. At first, Detective Harrison thought his computer had been hacked by criminals, but when he brought in cybersecurity experts to investigate, they found no evidence of external intrusion. The files seemed to be generating themselves from within his own computer system. Even more mysterious, the information contained details that had never been digitized anywhere, such as handwritten notes and private conversations. Sarah made sure that Harrison couldn't ignore the evidence by making it impossible for him to use his computer for anything else. Every program he tried to open would instead display crime scene photos and victim testimonies. His printer would automatically print out documentation of murders and financial transactions in the middle of the night. His phone would receive text messages containing addresses where bodies had been disposed of. Within a week, Detective Harrison was forced to take the supernatural evidence seriously. The information was too detailed and accurate to be fake, and the mysterious way it kept appearing suggested that something beyond normal human activity was involved. Harrison began a secret investigation into the 5 doctors, using the ghostly evidence as his starting guide. While Harrison worked on building a legal case, Sarah moved to the second phase of her plan, making the doctors confess their crimes through psychological torture that would break their sanity and resolve. Dr. Richard Kane was the first to crack under the supernatural pressure. Sarah began appearing to him constantly, not just at night but during his medical procedures. She would stand behind patients on operating tables, pointing at Kane accusingly and mouthing words he couldn't hear. During important surgeries, Kane would see Sarah's face instead of his patients' faces, causing him to freeze with terror in the middle of life-saving procedures. The psychological strain became too much for Kane to handle. During one particularly stressful surgery, With Sarah's ghost standing directly beside him, Kane began talking to the apparition out loud in front of his surgical team. "I'm sorry," he shouted at Sarah while his confused colleagues looked around to see who he was talking to. "We didn't want to kill you. You forced us to do it. You wouldn't leave us alone." The surgical team was shocked to hear their respected chief of medicine apparently having a conversation with an invisible person. Kane continued to ramble about Sarah's investigation and how they had to stop her from exposing their organ trafficking operation. Within minutes, Kane had confessed to murder and medical crimes in front of 6 witnesses. Hospital security was called to remove Kane from the operating room. He was taken to the psychiatric wing for evaluation, where he continued to insist that Sarah's ghost was tormenting him and that he needed to confess his crimes to make the haunting stop. The psychiatrists documented everything Kane said, creating an official record of his admissions of guilt. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was next to break. Sarah's strategy with Walsh involved attacking her professional reputation and personal relationships. Walsh would arrive at work to find that her surgical schedules had been mysteriously changed, causing her to miss important operations. Her medical licenses and certifications would disappear from her office and reappear in public areas where other staff members would find them and ask questions. Most devastating for Walsh was when Sarah began appearing to her family members. Walsh's teenage daughter started having dreams about a cleaning lady who showed her images of her mother killing patients for money. Walsh's husband began seeing a woman in cleaning clothes standing in their backyard at night, pointing toward their house accusingly. When Walsh's family confronted her about these strange visions, she tried to dismiss them as coincidences or imagination. But the supernatural encounters continued, and Walsh's family began to suspect that something terrible was happening. They started asking direct questions about Walsh's work at the hospital and whether she had ever done anything that might cause someone to seek revenge. Under pressure from both her family's questions and Sarah's constant supernatural harassment, Walsh finally broke down and confessed everything to her husband. She explained about the organ trafficking, the murders, and how they had killed Sarah to keep her quiet. Walsh's husband was horrified and immediately contacted the police, providing them with detailed information about his wife's crimes. Dr. Marcus Thompson's downfall came through his own greed and paranoia. Sarah had learned that Thompson kept detailed financial records of all his illegal activities, hidden in a safety deposit box at his bank. She began manipulating his environment to make him believe that someone was trying to steal his records and expose his crimes. Thompson would arrive at the bank to find that his safety deposit box had been opened and its contents rearranged, even though bank security insisted that no one else had accessed it. Documents would be missing or moved around, and sometimes Thompson would find threatening notes written in what appeared to be Sarah's handwriting. Convinced that he was being targeted by someone who had discovered his secret records, Thompson became increasingly paranoid and began taking desperate measures to protect himself. He started carrying the incriminating documents with him everywhere, afraid to leave them anywhere they might be stolen. Sarah's ghost took advantage of Thompson's paranoia by making him lose the documents in public places. His briefcase would mysteriously open while he was walking through crowded areas, spilling organ trafficking records and victim photographs onto busy sidewalks. Thompson would desperately try to collect the papers before anyone could see them, but not before several witnesses had observed the disturbing contents. One particularly damaging incident occurred when Thompson's briefcase opened during a medical conference, scattering crime scene photos and financial records in front of dozens of other doctors. Thompson's frantic attempts to collect the evidence only drew more attention to what the papers contained. Several conference attendees took photos of the documents before Thompson could retrieve them, and these images quickly spread through medical circles and eventually reached law enforcement. Dr. Lisa Chen's psychological breakdown was triggered by Sarah's manipulation of her medical equipment and patient care. Sarah began causing Chen's diagnostic machines to display images of organ trafficking victims instead of patient scans. During MRI procedures, the screens would show photographs of people who had been killed for their organs, along with detailed information about how each person had died. Chen tried to convince herself that she was hallucinating due to stress, but the images appeared on multiple machines operated by different technicians. Other medical staff began to notice that unusual things happened when Chen was around, and they started avoiding working with her out of fear that the equipment malfunctions might endanger patients. The breaking point came when Chen was treating a patient who reminded her of one of the organ trafficking victims. Sarah's ghost made the patient's monitor display the dead victim's photograph along with the message, "You killed me." Chen screamed and ran from the room, leaving her patient and confused colleagues behind. Chen was found hours later in the hospital chapel, praying frantically and confessing her sins aloud. She explained to the chaplain about the organ trafficking operation, the murders, and how the ghost of their cleaning lady victim was now tormenting them. The chaplain was obligated to report Chen's confession to the authorities, providing law enforcement with another detailed account of the crimes. Dr. David Rodriguez held out the longest against Sarah's psychological warfare, but his resistance ultimately made his downfall even more spectacular. Rodriguez tried to fight back against the supernatural harassment by consulting with paranormal investigators and spiritual practitioners. He hired people to perform exorcisms on his home and office, but Sarah's ghost was too powerful and determined to be driven away by such measures. Rodriguez's attempts to combat the haunting only made Sarah angrier and more vengeful. She began targeting him with increasingly violent supernatural attacks. Medical instruments would fly off tables when Rodriguez was nearby. Doors would slam shut, trapping him in rooms alone with Sarah's menacing presence. Hospital elevators would malfunction when he was inside them, leaving him trapped while Sarah's ghost appeared and threatened him. The final confrontation between Rodriguez and Sarah occurred in the same computer room where she had been murdered. Rodriguez had returned there hoping to find some clue about how to stop the haunting. Instead, he found himself face to face with Sarah's ghost, who appeared more solid and real than ever before. This time, Sarah was able to speak clearly and directly to Rodriguez. Her voice was filled with righteous anger as she detailed each of the crimes the doctors had committed and explained how their greed had destroyed dozens of innocent lives. She told Rodriguez that their punishment was only beginning and that she would never rest until justice was fully served. Rodriguez tried to fight back physically, swinging at the ghostly figure, but his hands passed right through her. Sarah laughed at his futile attempts to attack her and began throwing medical equipment around the room using her supernatural powers. Rodriguez was struck by flying instruments and knocked unconscious, but not before Sarah had forced him to witness a supernatural recreation of his own crimes. When Rodriguez woke up in the hospital the next morning, he was surrounded by police officers who had found him in the computer room, along with printed confessions of all his crimes. The confessions were written in his own handwriting, though he had no memory of writing them. Sarah's ghost had somehow forced him to document his guilt while he was unconscious. Detective Harrison had been building his case using the supernatural evidence Sarah had provided, and the confessions from all 5 doctors gave him everything he needed to make arrests. The organ trafficking ring was exposed, and investigators discovered evidence of more than 40 murders committed over 2 years. The 5 doctors were charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, organ trafficking, and medical malpractice. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including their own confessions, the mysterious documentation that had appeared throughout the investigation, and physical evidence that had been supernaturally preserved or revealed. Dr. Kane was found mentally incompetent to stand trial due to his complete psychological breakdown. He spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility, constantly claiming that Sarah's ghost continued to visit him. Dr. Walsh and Dr. Chen were both sentenced to life in prison without parole. Dr. Thompson received multiple life sentences and died in prison within 2 years. Dr. Rodriguez was sentenced to death and spent his remaining years on death row, reportedly still being tormented by supernatural phenomena. The organ trafficking investigation led to broader reforms in hospital oversight and medical ethics. Sarah's story became known throughout the medical community as a cautionary tale about corruption and the importance of protecting whistleblowers. Laws were passed to better protect hospital workers who reported suspicious activities. But perhaps most importantly, the families of the organ trafficking victims finally learned the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Many of the bodies were recovered and given proper burials. The illegal profits from the organ sales were recovered and used to compensate the victims' families. Sarah's ghost appeared less frequently after justice had been served, but hospital staff at Mercy General still reported occasional supernatural encounters. Sometimes cleaning staff would see a woman in a cleaning uniform working late at night, making sure everything was properly maintained and safe. The ghost seemed peaceful now, no longer driven by rage and the need for revenge. The hospital eventually installed a memorial plaque in honor of Sarah Martinez, recognizing her courage in exposing the organ trafficking ring and her sacrifice in pursuing justice. The plaque read, "In memory of Sarah Martinez, whose dedication to truth and justice saved countless lives. She reminds us that every person, regardless of position or status, deserves respect and protection." New hospital employees were told Sarah's story as part of their orientation, learning about the importance of speaking up when they witnessed wrongdoing and the tragic consequences that can result when corruption goes unchecked. Many staff members reported feeling watched over and protected by Sarah's spirit, as if she continued to guard the hospital against future crimes. The 5 doctors had assumed Sarah was just another casualty of their greed, someone whose death would be quickly forgotten by a world that had never paid much attention to her life. They had no idea that their victim would become their judge, jury, and ultimate destroyer. Sarah Martinez had been powerless in life, dismissed and ignored by people who saw her as beneath their notice. But in death, she had proven that justice can come from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the most determined to see right prevail over wrong. The doctors learned too late that every person has value and dignity, regardless of their social status or economic position. They discovered that crimes committed against the innocent will eventually be answered for, even if justice must reach from beyond the grave to ensure that the truth is revealed and the guilty are punished.